One, take one.
The population gonna jump in Saudi Arabia from today, 33 million, in 2030, something between 50 to 55 million. So in 2030, we're gonna reach the full capacity of the existing infrastructure of Saudi Arabia. That's raised very important question that we need to create new city.
I can't think of anybody that wouldn't want to be part of this project. It's going to be, without a question, the single most extraordinary piece of work that begins in the first quarter of the 21st century.
My immediate reaction was, what the hell is this?
There is a sort of moral atmosphere at the moment. You shouldn't be too clever, you shouldn't be too experimental, you shouldn't, but don't do anything too funky. I came out of a funky period.
If we look at the 20th century, we were really excited about the future. There was that kind of post-war idea that we could create a better, more democratic world. Those visions were very bold.
I still like it just because it's beautiful.
Throughout all of history, we've actually seen people, dreamers, thinkers, who've wanted to create those visions of how we might live in the future.
The world is stuck in a traffic jam. The world is screwed by the lack of social interaction. The world talks about cities, but in reality, the world is talking about the slums. When they say energy, they mean pollution. The world needs a reset. Most of us live in cities, and this reset has to start in the city.
What does that mean to be lead designer on a project of this scale?
It means being scared.
Honestly, you can't look at this the first time and not ask yourself, what are they thinking?
If it succeeds, it will be the new Babylon, so to speak. And if it doesn't succeed, it will be an interesting phenomenon.
The most valuable moments are really the moments that when you think back of them, you really didn't know anymore whether you were dealing with something totally mad or something utterly profound.
But then as soon as you start to get into it, you start to sort of think about the possibilities of it. And your mind starts to sort of begin to imagine that it is maybe possible, you know?
It's many projects sort of acquire their sanity as you move along. And that's, I think, very, very much the case here too. And the jury's out.
They say in a lot of projects that happen in Saudi Arabia, it can be done. This is very ambitious. They can't keep saying that, and we can keep proving them wrong.
In one of the most anticipated and intriguing projects in the history of city building, an ambitious plan for a megacity in the Saudi desert has the world wondering if this is really a blueprint for the future. The Line, the biggest infrastructure project in history, promises a revolution in urban living. But what is it? Who's making it? And can it actually work?
Everyone is coming to the New York World's Fair. They're coming from the four corners of the earth.
Every 50 years or 40 years, there is like this great surgence where state, culture, politics, technology all converge into this one singular amazing unity. Boom, with the New York Expo, you got like Futurama. Ladies and gentlemen, this is basically the whole new future and nothing like this was ever seen. It's almost inevitable that a project like NEOM should be engaged.
So since we have empty place and we want to have a place for 10 million people, then let's think from scratch.
But how and where do you start to design a city from scratch? What makes a successful city? And how do you avoid a dystopian nightmare?
Cities are our largest, most complex social constructs. And as architects, we put them in physical terms. I would argue that moving into the 21st century, they represent our most compelling problems.
The era that we're living in now is one where we've become quite worried about the future.
Everywhere we look, disaster looms. For some, the very idea of progress is part of the problem. The future is on hold.
The questions and the threat on our planet is so immense that I really don't understand that we try to answer these questions with old answers.
we're approaching a certain edge that is kind of crumbling underneath us. It's gonna shift, and because it's a cliff, we don't see what's on the other side.
What I see in a lot of briefs and in a lot of projects is that there is an abundance of talk about all the issues, about sustainability, and at the same time, you feel a complete lack of real urgency.
We as humans have a challenge. And the challenge is make sure that we all understand that we screwed it, and we have to somehow arrange what we did wrong.
The state of panic that should almost emerge if you really take it seriously, that's curiously absent from a lot of projects. And I do believe that in the context of this operation, the state of panic, for whatever reason, is abundantly present.
When you look at the past visions of the future, you can learn about the era that they were dreamt up in. This idea of flying cars and maybe living on a different planet. Rainer Banham famously said, how do we know what the future looks like? It's got a monorail in it. If you look at our visions of the future now, what do they have in them? Greenery, right? All the renderings of every architecture you look at now, there's always like green walls and trees. So that kind of shows that the environment is like at the forefront of our minds now when we're looking at what the future might look like.
And so NEOM, the creators of the line, have developed their response to these challenges. A bold future vision, a car-free, carbon-neutral city. But how will it work?
The line is something that is, of course, intriguing to many people, puzzling to many people, and in some ways puzzling even to those who are involved in designing it.
So let's imagine that we're in the top of that building, and I have to go to the top of that building. The only way of doing this is by going down, going up again. It's going to take me, what, 10, 15 minutes? The walking distance from one to the other is, what, 2, 3 minutes? That's what we want to happen in the line.
The line will be 170 kilometers long. There will be 140 modules, each one 200 meters wide and 800 meters long, but also standing 500 meters above sea level. Each module will be able to accommodate 80,000 people, and the finished line will have a capacity to house a population of 9 million.
It is fundamentally a vertical city. And a vertical city that's structured this way is a completely new thing.
The line promises to innovate every aspect of city living, but for most of its life since its genesis in 2017, the development of the idea has been undertaken in the strictest secrecy.
The fact that it was secret is, of course, curious in relation to how big it is. I mean, it's pretty hard to miss.
And we spent a lot of time understanding relationships in architecture. But in this case, it's by far the first time I've ever heard and thought about someone talking about, well, have we thought about curvature of the Earth and how this is working?
The whole architectural world is a sort of network. I have fairly close personal friends in this town who eventually it emerges that they're doing something to do with NEOM. And you're all very sort of cagey about it and shy about it. But you realize, all right, okay then.
In February of 2019, I got a call. Before I knew it, I was on an online conversation with a very, very dynamic individual that later on I would find out to be Antonio Vivas.
There's something musical in good cities and in good architecture. That rhythm is the one that makes cities better. There are cities that have no rhythm, that they just lost it.
And whatever I must have said got us on board. And then the game started.
So we talk about a lot of ideas. Why can't we build a circle and we start to connect it with movement, mobilities, trains, whatever, and then we start to build it slowly till it's completed for 10 million people. We brainstorm, we work with a team, we did a competition with the best designer on the whole planet. All of them, they provide us cities based on the existing methods, but with a better solutions. Except one adopt that idea, and he say, let's turn it from a circle to a line. There, the idea started, and we start to study it further.
From the very beginning of the competition, it became really evident that we had a set of very unique opportunities to describe potentials of city making in the 21st century.
Of course, the brief was to build a city, and you weren't going to win a competition by not building anything. We thought about it a little. Well, if we were to build something, then it's probably got to be the tightest little footprint that you could to find a way to treat something of this size, even before coming, was daunting. And only when you went up in a helicopter and you saw the beauty of it, that's when it was almost easier. The solution is not to create what we know of. The solution is to stay super consolidated to allow this to stay.
Northwest of Saudi Arabia, untouched, almost empty. It have mix of topography, mountains, valleys, oases, dunes, beaches, islands, corals, from skiing till diving. That's the place.
Stretching from the mountains through dramatic desert landscapes, down to the Gulf of Aqaba, with a footprint of just 34 square kilometers, the brief was every architect's dream challenge.
We received an invitation that says Oma is invited to participate in an experiment for vertical urbanism.
I first learned of the project when ER pulled me into a meeting and started showing me what he was working on, and I was like, oh. Okay.
The whole design and construction industry, it's a prehistoric industry almost. We pour concrete the same way we poured 100 years ago. We think about building in the same way. We design almost in the same way. So it needs more or less a radical change.
The more he went on about it, the more he told about it, I learned that this radicality was the product of a question rather than our answer. Curious thing was the product of a client that apparently was more radical than us.
When he presented the line and turned from circle to a line, it was the width of it, it's almost 2 kilos. My problem that the infrastructure idea is good, but when you get in it with a 2 kilo of width, you don't feel it. I told the team, how about if we take that 2 kilo and we flip it to 2 towers to the whole line? Does that gonna work? It's gonna be massive.
100% sustainable, a reduced footprint on the land, powered by renewable energy, consigning the car to history and creating a 5-minute walkable city. But to do this, they'll have to totally reinvent, well, almost everything about how we live and how cities work.
In our presentation, we showed a conceptual map that took New York apart. It was very important to us to develop the scale that broke down socially into communities that had personalities and give people opportunities to live in very different environments, like you would in London or Manhattan.
Tom was able to understand that we were looking for something that went beyond, something that was almost poetical.
It's actually an incredibly complicated project, but the big idea seems incredibly kind of simple, right? That you can grasp it.
Now, people like me say, yes, that's all very well, but what's really interesting is the nitty-gritty of interesting cities.
When we engaged for the first time with Sir Peter Cook, a living legend of architecture and urbanism, I presented our ideas, and I think that he more or less went, what are you drinking, my friend? So
many years ago, I conceived of a project that became quite famous called the Plug-in City. And I think on the back of that, I've become something of a sort of an old sage in the business of linear cities and experimental cities, if I may use that word.
For him, it must be a really, really interesting thing to be able to work at this point of his life, given the nature of his history and how he affected architecture.
After 1 month, Sir Peter Cook was telling me, Tony, we're gonna make this.
Personally, since you have a sort of basic principle for something, I'm somebody who likes to sort of tweak it, to say, that will work, obviously, and that will work, obviously. So what happens if we just make it a bit naughty?
I mean, there's clear reference in the imagery to Super Studio, to Archie Graham, Archie Zoom, etc., etc. The phantasmagoria of the late 60s is sort of living its finest hour in the Arabian desert. I think that is but maybe things and visions of a certain time can have a belated relevance 40, 50 years on.
I think you can only do it by example. I think that you've got to show that you yourself are interested in variation and experiment. It's always assumed that the young are more progressive. Now I think that the youngest architects are nervous. They're very nervous. They're not natural experimenters. They're a bit scared.
The idea of linear cities is not new. Linear motifs can be seen in cities all over the world. But more often than not, the dream of creating the linear city has remained just that.
Sometimes the linear city makes sense. So you can see that with Bilbao, for example, where it's strung along the river valley, or any of these coastal cities where you want to be near to the beach, like Dubai, for example. And the linear city then does have something to say.
And perhaps the bold experiments and confidence of the mid-20th century are exactly what's needed to help us confront and overcome our current challenges. Is the answer to modern problems more modernity?
Modernity in architecture probably began around the end of the 19th century. That manifested itself in Paris, in Eugene Haussmann, who basically rebuilt Paris to save it and created this astonishing idea of what the city could be.
You could argue that modernity itself is the result of a demographic explosion, and that therefore architecture had to reinvent itself simply because the numbers it had to deal with were unprecedented.
If you look around at cultures that are just propagating endless fields of point towers and saying that that's the way to create a society, then you ask yourself, maybe we should rethink this. Maybe we should have some new urban ideas.
From a playing field of 20 world-class firms, an initial 5 are chosen to develop their own module and bring the line into reality, to create a collective vision of the future.
Yes, people have anticipated this, but it hasn't been done. And it hasn't been even nearly accomplished at this scale.
It's sort of surprising for architecture. I mean, architecture hasn't seen this, kind of in such a long time.
Any new city, it have to be top down. All the cities that we have today existing, it's based in all cities, problem, solution. So the existing model of cities, it's based on problem and solution because it's being fixed all the time. But if it's top down, then you can design something like this.
And so the world's best architects assemble to work on an idealistic and futuristic vision in a remote location, one of the boldest ideas of each of their careers. But the idea of a competition takes an unexpected turn.
And I went to London months ago to present something, and a presentation was about to happen, and then the question was, well, do you mind if this other group would join in? And it became clear all of a sudden it wasn't going to be a presentation, it was going to be a dialogue.
I was feeding off the energy of the others. The others were definitely feeding off the energy of us. I remember, Peter Cook sensing this one team say, why don't we all go downstairs and have a drink and just bond.
It was quite jolly, actually. It didn't seem like a business meeting. I mean, yes, there were sort of, a few bean counters around the edges, but we didn't listen to them much.
We've got to conceive of a project in which the inclusion of this infrastructure is thought collectively.
Before long, it was not that we were literally competing, but we were actually working together to build up a narrative about livability.
Every step of the way, the project demands constant innovation from everyone working on it. The goal is to think differently about everything.
Working on a daily basis with architects, I always say to them, guys, take your brain, put in the wash machine, make it rounds, and then come up with new ideas. Get out of your comfort zone.
We, as architects and urbanists, have to think differently about everything.
When we first began, there was this moment from several voices where people were looking at the Apollo mission from the 1960s.
This is the vehicle which will thrust 3 Americans toward the moon in the greatest voyage of this century.
Where you had this incredible convergence of the government leadership under President John F. Kennedy, amassing the greatest minds of the United States.
NASA and NEOM are a twin in a way, 60 years apart. Different projects, but very similar uniqueness to them.
You could imagine the amount of naysayers. You could imagine the amount of critics and those who kind of worried if it was even possible.
It is a very daring thing. We have 10 years to design and paint for the world what we believe the future livability and business in the world.
But with a vision this radical, sometimes you need inspiration from out of this world.
I was in a conversation one day with 2 physicists, quantum physicists. One of them looks at the other and looks at me and said, you know what? Perhaps it's the time of the poets now. We need poets.
Engineering and designer is not enough without art. Don't want to create a city without having the whole city as a piece of art.
I'm a concept artist, art director, and I'm actually been working, fleshing out a bold vision for NEOM using the my past in science fiction and fantasy productions.
Olivier Prone is one of Hollywood's most prominent creative art directors, a creator of fantasy and futuristic worlds, from Guardians of the Galaxy to Harry Potter and Doctor Strange.
I think artists are a little freer to think about the problem in a way that's a little more expansive.
I just try to play with it in a truly artistic sense. It's like when you're looking at clouds. You can look at clouds and you're going to start to see shapes, drawings. I do the same with the landscape.
It is aspiring to take things that we've seen happening in sci-fi and say, is it really sci-fi or is it really the world? That's what is at the heart of this, whether you want to believe it or not, and whether it'll get there, but it has to aspire to that.
Is this what it takes to visualize the future, to veer into the realms of science fiction? Won't this just end up another failed vision?
If you build a city of the future, you cannot know everything already. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a city of the future.
Future, by definition, you never get it. The future always happens after you. What you can do is bringing the future to the present. You can somehow accelerate history if you want, and boom, have the future here.
You look at the thing, and you think, that's something we could have done, but it's done. And it's here as not the answer to a brief, but as a brief. And what do we do now?
The urgency of the project continues to inform the look and feel of the city, demanding ever greater innovation. But can any of this work? Is it practical, possible, or even desirable?
The idea of the linear city then, as interpreted as a vertical linear city, is a further step.
Humans in general, they tend to go horizontal and avoid vertical by all means possible. Lifts and stairs and things like that are abrupt interruption in their movement. They hate it.
What if we just say that the ground is now multiple grounds, rather than always that singular ground that we always go down to?
This is this permanent ground floor that we're generating, because you're going to have the pizzeria and the cleaner at any given level. You're going to have the football pitch at any given level, and these many high lines are going to allow us to go from one place to another, having everything that you need at 5 minutes.
It seems the more we build up, the more we need to innovate.
I think the best cities are slightly naughty. You go into a gridded city, you think nothing's happening, you go around the corner, and behind the scenes there's something really intriguing.
As an architect, it's easy to fall back on the notion that it is a building. Your instinct is to try to go back to the tools that you're unfamiliar with.
But a project of this scale couldn't happen just anywhere. It takes more than mere ambition to generate something this epic.
You have the models now. We work on it. It sounds very doable. And the ideas is like amazing. So it's massive, it's huge. I wish that I can explain it in a smaller way, but it's project making money. It's project absorbing the demand that we assumed in Saudi Arabia, and it's something that creates the new way of building city and new way of living.
The thing with these Grand Projets, these big projects, is that they need everything to come together. You have to have the architects, you have to have the money, the top-down power. It's kind of this alchemy almost.
We all know as urbanists, you need a proper kind of state to provide the platform for this to actually occur.
And maybe this time we can do it differently. Maybe we've learned from the mistakes of the past.
That's for my new Chevrolet station wagon.
As we all know, the 20th century cities were driven by infrastructural planning in terms of roads, especially in LA. The large vastness in terms of its territorial expansion was driven by the automobile, and it has not been sustainable.
All cities based in problem and solution, and car is solution for a problem.
I drive a Tesla, and I see that now as that's a transitional. That's the last car before there's no cars. It's funny, after you've done the project, you do kind of become more aware of things that you put in that project that had to do with your own critique of your own environment. Because LA, in some way, one of the critiques would be is it's going to destroy the natural environment that people come for. Finally, it's all covered with this stuff.
The commute was an initial wonderful thing that happened, allowed for whole societies and to come together and create networks of cities.
But I think cities are now seeing that maybe the car isn't the panacea that it was once kind of thought of as being.
But in a carless city, 170 kilometers long, how will people experience more of the line than just their immediate neighborhood?
spine of the line is a fast rail system that connects the point A to the point B, the sea to the mountains. That's the only thing that can genuinely replace having cars.
Vertical transportation is a little bit more like a subway system. You're not like calling an elevator, it's just arriving on a regular basis and you're moving up and down.
If it was just apartments blandly going 500 meters, 800 meters, a bit tiresome. But what you want is for the nature of the place to start weaving into it.
How to be a good part of your environment is actually a much more challenging question, because it's not just a formal one. So we came to it with a team of engineers trying to ask ourselves tough questions.
I guess what I love about NEOM, it's at the nexus of new technologies, innovations, urban revolutions. Let's think about new communities, how they're going to be using urban spaces in a new way.
So what do the renderings and visualizations of the line tell us about today's ideals for the future?
We thought that this would generate a sort of integration of community, and this is my obsession. How can I generate, through variety, a community that is worthwhile living in and that is generative of creativity, and then, of course, of good economy, of jobs, so on and so forth.
We've realized that if you're 500 meters tall, that there was a spot at about 300 meters high that we felt was a sweet spot urbanistically and allowed for a place that people could come together and provide the livable public realm. So we wanted a park. We still do. God damn it, pardon my language. We believe you have to have it.
But who will actually live in the line? Will it just attract the rich and curious, seeking a temporary adventure? Or can it be somewhere people will actually want to settle and make their home?
It will answer questions that we are not asking now because no one else is daring to. And so the target users or the target groups that might be actually living there is quite broad.
I have a friend who moved to, he's an American friend, who moved to Miami. In Miami, when you get out from your office, you're on vacation. Immediately, you're next to entertainment, culture, sport, retail. So each day it has to be excitement to finish your work and go and enjoy it in NEOM. So we are competing with Miami in that area.
Well, when you work in a project that deep and when it becomes part of your working hours every day and your dreaming hours also, you always want to live in your projects, no? I mean, it's something we struggle with all the time.
There was a moment in development of the project, people started saying, oh, I could live there. People are starting to believe, kind of that it's possible.
It has not been done before. We need this pioneering spirit in order to create not only cities, but to create a planet which will sustain the next couple of thousand years.
It's a project of a certain radicality that you rarely find in the West, or that you simply don't find in the West.
We are limited by legacy systems. And so we've inherited, the medieval city, we've inherited the roads from the Romans. When you work within all of these constraints, it constrains you to thinking inside the box.
If the people that designed Manhattan, if they had the technological capacity that we have today, they would have done something similar to what we have done for NEOM. They would have tried to keep the density at the correct level to make sure that creativity, interaction, dialogue happened, and at the same time, keeping this direct access to nature.
It became evident that we're going to deal with the relationship between the natural environment and the man-made environment.
You have a 9 million population that's going to be on 34 square kilometers, as opposed to 1,500 square kilometers in London. I mean, the numbers aren't half or 10%. It's drastically different.
Europe is very crowded and we don't have that space. That region that NEOM is being built in just has that freedom.
Due to my past in the cinema industry, you thought, you've seen all the most striking place on earth already. And I was very surprised to discover that in Saudi Arabia, you actually have striking natural landscape, unseen, unheard of completely, but yet it's remarkable. It's like it's discovering a new planet.
In fact, I think what the line is the space that it leaves behind. And if you think of it in that respect, then actually 95% of the design is leaving nature.
When you're far away, you've never been to a desert, you think desert is like barren sand, but it's exactly the opposite. It's filled with life. and life waiting to spring to life.
You arrive in a place and you look at it, let's say, from the satellite, and all of a sudden you discover that it's a bit like a hinge. The kind of civilizations that have shaped the Western world and the Eastern world are meeting here somehow. How can't you think about this?
Nowhere in the world has a commitment that scale has been made, that you would keep everything within 5%. You can have everything, but you can do it within the smallest footprint possible, so the planet has a chance to breathe again. This is where I think the world should be going. You should allow nature to sprawl into cities rather than cities sprawl into nature.
That raises another interesting issue. If it is at this moment beautiful, and you stick this thing in it, haha, the thing must be beautiful, otherwise it's screwing it up. The more pragmatic engineers and the bean counters will always say, well, that's the efficient thing to do. That doesn't necessarily naturally have an aesthetic.
And the line is all about ambition. A truly global city, becoming a new international hub.
I think that inspiration happens in the most unexpected place, in the most unexpected situation.
So why is this happening in Saudi Arabia? Why not Europe or the US?
For once here, we have a client who is willing to go, no, guys, what if?
We think about what kind of opportunity we have. So we have the cash, we have the land, we have the stability, we have good infrastructure, we are a G20 country.
NEOM itself is one of the most amazing places in the past decade where the best minds are coming together. And we can test out different solutions.
The whole country, the whole enterprise, the whole city is the world's biggest startup. And so what comes with a startup is huge excitement, chaos. You know, things will work, they'll die, others will, you know, thrive, and then we'll build on those. So it feels like being in a sort of washing machine of ideas and ways of doing things.
The ambition is proportional to the challenges. You're not going to have challenges if there's not a certain degree of ambition.
We can take a fresh look at everything. We can say, what would be the kind of environment that if you had a blank sheet of paper, you would want to create here for this century, for now?
NEOM and the line is all about discovering new technologies.
Often funding or governance comes in the existing infrastructure. Now we have the opportunity to really kind of break through and implement any type of technology to kind of help us think about these things, or urban design solution.
It shows a new vision, and not just for the kingdom, but for the world, really. And it's something to be proud of. And I think oftentimes we don't really have something to be proud of.
We all step back with a certain question every now and then and say, is this really happening or not? Or can it happen? Is it going to happen in the time frame?
It's very easy to imagine that it will go wrong. Maybe it is essential to imagine it going right. And of course, architects are by definition optimists.
You can't do this if you're not excited about it. You cannot. You can't do this if you're not believing in it.
There's another very important thing. Saudi Arabia is perhaps one of the youngest countries on earth. And I would say the whole Arab world is one of the cultural environments where youth is more powerful.
A lot of the Saudi youth embody the spirit of NEOM even before it came about. I would say it was already there, and now NEOM is just providing us with a physical space.
We're taking some of the social ambitions that we have for here, for people to live and work alongside each other regardless of their background, for equality for women. You'll see when you move around that lots of the people working here at the highest level are, you know, incredibly clever women.
The last 5 years, Saudi has changed in a good way. If you came to me 5 years ago and you told me that NEOM is happening, I was like, what are you talking about? And then when I came here, I was like, oh my God, it's happening.
What excites me is being part of something where I can genuinely make a small change.
I'm very excited about the present of KSA. What's happening right now is already so much and makes me so happy. I'm going to be part of why this is happening and how we're going to change.
The other day, I read a term, third culture, and it's basically people who've lived many places and have become sort of a bit of everything. You have over 60 nationalities here.
It's incredibly scary. There is nowhere to look to see how it might have been done before. And being part of it feels like it's scary and exciting, but it could have a huge impact.
Is this buildable? That's the friction, the dreamers with the design, because we encourage them to think big, and the executors like myself and my team, how we will make that happen.
This project presents an opportunity for one to do something that's never been done before. And, you know, there's enormous responsibility that comes with that, because you're dealing with the lives of people that are going to live here and that are going to have families here.
If it's to be a success, parts of it will fail. Because if they just stay as we believe things ought to be at this particular moment, they won't be.
Cities that really prosper and thrive in the long term are the ones that have the energy and the ability and the infrastructure to go on reinventing themselves.
A city is a place that's going to betray you. I decide that this place is going to be used as an hotel. 10 years later, the hotel are offices, a condominium.
No matter how much you'd like to plan the city, people use it in a completely different way, and the socio-political environment will turn it into something else.
Where they thought that they would have a parking, they have a park, and where they had a park, there's a parking.
So you have to be flexible and nimble to take those changes and quickly adapt. If you don't adapt, you will end up disappearing. We decided with the engineers to build a chassis, if you want, string them together in whatever shape we want them to be.
So it can change during the process of construction, or it can change after the process of construction.
You can just unplug it, take it to the factory, add something to it, and bring it back.
To make the desert human, you're going to need some top-down, hardcore engineering, because, I mean, technically, an increasingly large part of the Earth is becoming uninhabitable. And the desert is a kind of interesting preview of what might be in store, and where action and radical action is simply needed to foster human presence.
The creators of the line want to make a step change in energy production, transforming how cities will be powered. A vast wind garden is planned, alongside initiatives to harness the power of green hydrogen.
That, for me, as someone that works in applied science, is fantastic, because these are things that we've been always pondering, but we see them coming to reality and being taken seriously.
They also promise to tackle the inherent water scarcity of the desert by investing in recycled water projects and solar energy-powered desalination plants.
There is a lot of concepts applied here that could be adopted elsewhere. It will change the face of the construction industry.
What it will lead to will be interesting for all architects. Will have an impact on our profession, I think.
Architecture is about future, thinking in advance. And we are supposed to be also a little bit, not only designers, but also psychologists, because we need to try to understand what is going to be.
The fact that there's so many people involved, something interesting is going to happen, because the voices are coming in, and you have multiplicity of the interpretation. That's where the juices are. That's where the potential is.
Will there be hiccups, mistakes? Absolutely. If there weren't, I would say basically the vision was not ambitious enough.
The scale of the operations and the number of architects is just unheard of. I can't think of a project in the world that even comes even close to this project. I mean, it's an incredibly unique project in that sense.
I choose to see it not as an object, not as a singular thing, but as something that is kind of creating an ecosystem that is going to grow and create life around it, and even in ways that you can't predict now.
I don't think it'd even be understood until it's built. When you really are in the mountains in NEOM and jump on a little high-speed train and you're on the water in 20 minutes, it's gonna be just startling.
Even the greatest ideas shouldn't necessarily be static. They should be capable of encouraging other things to happen.
It's not a monolith, and we want to plant into the earth and say, hey, here what we did this year, and that's it.
Can a project of this size really deliver at the human scale? Can the line overcome this age-old tension in city planning?
We need to have this moment of experimentation. We are in a moment of change everywhere in the world. So there is, I always say, a constellations of things, politics, geopolitics, and economy, that it brings it to a certain movement that we need to take as an opportunity. So we need to have a leap toward the future. We need to do it.
The merits of this project in the long run will be tied to the way Saudi Arabia will develop in the long run. Will the current modernization persist? Will what until recently we all dismissed as an extremely conservative society that lived off the back of oil wealth, will the aggressive entry into the 20th century, will it persist? Will the change endure and be lasting? Then a project like this will be seen as a symptom of a benign change.
The city build is already underway, with first phase completion planned to align with Saudi's 2030 vision. The full 170 kilometers will still be being built long into the future. And perhaps that's the point. The first phase will demonstrate a possibility, a provocation to the world, suggesting that the future is closer than we think.
What we're trying to say is that, well, we think that there's another way of doing things. Is that the solution for everybody? We don't know it. Is this a solution for some of the problems that humanity is going through? We think it is.
The idea is, you know, we're your petri dish. We will try these things. Okay, our environment is unique, but you can take things from this.
We want to create the new civilization for tomorrow, and we need to encourage other nations to keep doing the same things for a better planet.
Maybe we should have some new urban ideas and rethink how people are going to live. And that's what takes you to this, just asking that question.
The question is, how can we create something that's better? And that is what both fascinates me and scares the hell out of me.
It's been talked about before, but it hasn't been done before. It's the fact that you do it and you produce it, right?
Nothing is impossible. Failure is acceptable, yes. But if we don't have this project now, if we don't make it, we'll never make a leap towards the future.
And ultimately, we're catching the unicorn, because who builds this first is the one that could claim its feasibility and its reality. And we're all now part of this incredible new endeavor.
I mean, the architectural world cults a relation of mutual envy. That's how it exists. So I'm sure this project will be no exception, which translates in both sheepish admiration and copycat behavior and extreme dismissal on the other hand. And I'm pretty sure that this project will create both reactions. Of that, actually, is the only thing of the future that I can predict with a degree of certainty.
If this solution can help other societies to improve the way they live, to generate more quality of life, to generate a livability that is for all and not just for a few, NEOM is useful.
Well, we are bringing all the piece of puzzle together. I don't know what's the outcome of it. That's gonna be the creativity of the people gonna live from the whole globe in NEOM. I can promise you that's gonna be something new and creative, but what is it? It's unknown. We're gonna see.
Behind all that grandeur and that vision, it's still us. Try to better ourselves. And I think that need to remain the heart of it, really.